Did you write it down?
Of course not.
Okay.
As predicted, as you predicted. Can I jump in?
Yes, please jump in.
You forgot, for real.
Absolutely. That's what the break is meant for. You need to forget what you wanted to ask.
Yes, Wanjiru.
Decompress. So, I think we are all grappling with how do we create the change we want to see.
Mm-hmm.
And just two reflections. One, it is a change moment.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a sense, much as there's all this political, shenanigans going on, it is a change moment.
Yes.
There are things that can't continue as they are.
Mm-hmm.
And that is why there was such strong support for the Kenya Kwanza, party. They came in working against the state, and the amount of, whether there is contestation around some aspects of the election,
Mm-hmm.
there was support on the ground because Kenyans want change.
Yes.
How do we get that change? And, how do we deal with values?
Mm-hmm.
Joe Kobudi, who's also been on this program, talks about, different publics, that there is the Kenyan who goes to church, then there is the Kenyan who goes to the political rally. Those are different people. Then there is the Kenyan who engages with government. And when Kenyans engage with government, they feel that's an outside entity to me.
Yes.
When I go to church or when I'm within my homestead, that is internal to me. So there is this disconnect because of a sense of maybe ingrained injustice, that these institutions are more coercive to me than they are facilitative to me. So I identify more with my family, the
Yes.
inner. So how do we get citizens to identify with the political system, with their governance system? I think that's the question. If we're going to do family education, we have to recognize that if you do family education in Nairobi to somebody living in the informal settlements, working in the informal sector, you can't, and you're talking values, well and good, but then social justice. You have a system that has marginalized people
Yes.
and continues to do so. So I'm not really saying I have an answer, but I'm just saying our realities.
Yes.
Yeah, how do we deal with that?
For me, I feel that, and as you've said rightly, we have to address the factors that are impeding Kenyans to resonate with leadership, and they need to have the proper and leaders who have integrity in place across the board. I think for me, one would be to ensure that we have continuous investment in civic education and political education. And this will have to be at the cost of Kenyans ourselves. I think we have often waited for support, which is not, there's nothing wrong with that. But we must have the homegrown and home-driven efforts to ensure that we have political education, especially because that's the disconnect, that the Kenyans resonate and understand their lack of involvement, whether it's intentional or deliberate, has consequences. Then secondly, we must boldly as a country address inclusion, political inclusion of everyone. And this is going to be a very difficult conversation, and it must be driven by the citizens. It's not a political question. A lot of the problems you're facing as a country politically have been caused by the political class, and we're expecting the political class to have solutions. This cannot happen. And that's why we have been pushing. And there's hope, for example, with the bipartisan talks. There has got to be the deliberate effort to include everyone at the table. It's not a question for the political class. It's not their problem. We are all in it as Kenyans, and we must address inclusion. What does that mean? We must go to the bottom and ensure that anyone who would have been marginalized or excluded has access to information that they can understand and digest, and have an opportunity to come to the table, whether directly or indirectly, but have their views heard and felt. And rightly, as you see, what gives me hope is that there's that awakening in Kenyans are aware. I mean, look at whatever has been happening in the recent past, whatever your reason for raising your voice, whether for or against the political main discourse, whether it's a protest or whatever we want to call it, there is that association by Kenyans that they have a view on the matter. And that for me is very important. It's landmark. Compared to a lot of countries, Kenyans are largely invested in the political issue. So that's an investment that we need to take and use it positively and ensure it's not lost at the election day. And that's why we keep on questioning that and raising the awareness. For Kenyans, elections is not the day of the election. We must move beyond and to be part of the process. And how we do that, I'll give an example. At the local level, again, we go to the local level when things are not going right, whether it's injustice, whether it's we have even children amongst us who we know are criminals or have criminal elements, whether they're in conflict with the law, whether they are the small petty thieves. How do we address that as a community? Because then if we cannot collectively find solutions to rehabilitate them, to find a way out to make them better citizens, we cannot be fully part of the process at the top. And I mean, a lot of things people will say are idealistic, but they're not. They are practical solutions. If we go to the market day and you find a police officer, I'll just give an example, or a county council employee who perhaps people feel is not doing the right thing. Maybe they are trying to extort money from people. What do we do about it? And what power do we have within the confines of law? So there is hope. And for me, again, I say because Kenyans are invested in what is happening to them. The cost of living is not sparing anyone. So that's an opportunity to even start the conversation and take it further. What do we do about the country? How do we better manage our finances? And for me, that's a good start to ensure that we are all part of the conversation. But let me ask this question.
Yes. I mean, we have this conversation that Kenyans seem to have made a mistake when they went to the ballot and chose the leaders that they chose. Mm-hmm. If we take that narrative to its logical conclusion, then it would mean every 5 years Kenyans make a terrible mistake. Because if you look at the turnover of the elected leaders, it's high. Mm-hmm. Perhaps we are saying something that isn't being listened to, and we ourselves, even as we are saying it, we don't hear it. Mm-hmm. This thing that we refer to as corruption, can we pause a little bit and perhaps examine it closely? Mm-hmm. We like the idea of ensuring that we get what we want. Call it a coping mechanism. Mm-hmm. Parting with a few shillings seemed to solve that problem. Mm-hmm. And you take that matter, give it a full breath and look at everything that involves, say, law enforcement, like driving a car, having the correct licenses, and not having it, and the consequences that follow. A little money helps solve that problem. But what does it tell you? For you to look for an easier way of solving it, it means that what has been laid down as a solution for such a problem is burdensome. People do not feel that that process will serve their interest. So should you not look at that and say, if people prefer an alternative way, it's not that they're corrupt. It's a coping mechanism that they have for dealing with something which they feel ordinarily would be burdensome to them. It's something they'd rather not deal with. That's why the term coping mechanism comes into play. If you look at the choices of leaders, yes, we seem to say they make a mistake. But it's like we know that these are the people who will provide us with the ease of passage. Because if you have leaders who represent this view that we have, this coping mechanism, then we're in a good place. Because they will then now not force us to follow the route that doesn't serve our interest. So the politicians serve their interest, we also serve our interest. Now, there's this higher moral calling and platform that we say we should aspire to. Why should we? If we say that bribery is bad, why? It's against the law? Then why don't we change that law so that we set limits? For overspeeding, you are only allowed to give a bribe of 200 shillings, no more. No.
You can negotiate up to 200.
You can negotiate up to 200, but if it goes beyond then,
it's a fine.
It's a fine, yes. And then now, the issue of the digital economy that Mheshimiwa Wala was talking about comes into play. You have all my details, and I will pay the fine right there and then. And even if I don't, create an IOU system where at some point, I will have to pay you. I'm simply saying this.
Yes.
If we look at the matters that bedevil us in the same way we've been looking at them for God knows how long, you know what that means. We're not really going to make any movement forward. And I'm saying this. The people are speaking. we are speaking. We are actually telling anybody who cares to listen and ourselves that this is how we actually want to function, and we find it works for us.
Does it?
Actually, it's called a coping mechanism. It works for you at the time it does, because you do not have the faith that this long-term view that you keep talking about will actually work. So let me deal with what I can on a daily basis. If the other one works, I will see it. But for the time being,
Then probably CT,
Yes.
then what the people are actually expressing, it's not a satisfaction with the current state of affairs. It's a frustration.
yes, it is.
They're venting.
Yes, it is.
When they keep changing the leaders,
Yes,
it's
it-
because they think, no, this
I
something
do
is not
want-
working. It's
exactly.
not working.
Yes.
Yeah.
The problem is in the identification of the right leader.
Yes.
Is maybe in knowing, so how do I vet and know
Yes.
that this is the right leader?
Yes.
But if everybody who is coming up for election is using the top leaders that we have in our country as, their moral compass,
Yes.
and everybody, all of us are looking at and comparing, City and Taximama, City is too soft, bana. Atachaguliwa na nani? It's because we are looking at our national leaders, and which is why our topic today is on, do our national leaders actually promote chapter 6 of our constitution on leadership, on integrity? When they behave the way they behave, when they go out there and they call each other Williamze or Chieta or what, when they're using such words in public, are they sending the right signals?
Yes, they are applying the sentiments of chapter 6, but chapter 6b. Because, and let us see it for what it is. Because they, better than us, know exactly what chapter 6 puts across as what is desired. They understand it so well that when the government that was tasked with the monumental burden of implementing this tax, that they first started altering this chapter. They made sure that they went to town in altering it, so that what we were left with was so bastardized that it actually can't do anything substantive. Now, again, they are speaking to us, meaning this person we knew and whom we know, this person, when elected, should give us what we desire. We elect them. Then they get there. Listen, when people are sent to positions of authority, they change. Okay? They change. Now, that metamorphosis, let's not run away from it. What is it that makes them change the way they do? Because it's a conversation we have. They change. Now, when they're in a position where there's genuine power, they really change. To the point where we don't even recognize them.
In fact, Siti, what you're speaking to it's interesting, and this conversation is compelling because on one hand, Anne, you talk about the family and the values in the family and the issue of domestic relations as domestic violence. And the question I'd ask there is, as FIDA, you've been quite involved in this space. The women's movement has been involved. Do you think there's been an over-legal approach to dealing with the social issues in society at that level? And then at this other level, talking about leadership and integrity as ELOG, what would you say? Because my sense is that our electoral system is the weakest link in our democracy, and chapter 6 hinges on that. So that the way you get into nomination, the way you get into being elected is all about money, and it's about, if you look at the nomination process, if you look at, there's all the violations of chapter 6 begin in the build-up. So the moment you get in, you're beholden, you're paying back, then the system breaks down again in that there are no checks, or the checks that are there are superficial. They're not really bringing that individual accountability. So the system, to my view, is very broken. So on one hand, at family level, where possibly we can do a lot of influence, we are not. So we are not doing that family education. We are not talking about values. We are not, schooling ourselves.
This system you're speaking of, which system is it? The one you say is broken.
I'm saying at family level, our family system and values are broken to the extent that there's a lot of violence going on. And my question then is, has the women movement that have really done a lot in bringing this issue to the fore, the legislation, is it time for us, for the women's movement to look and say, let's deal with this as a social issue and let's change tact? But then also at the national level, it's the electoral system.
It's the systems that
It's the system and the systems that link the accountability, political accountability system. That system is not working. And if you tell citizens to hold leaders to account, how will they? Are you saying recall? But
Okay, I think for me, if I may, because it's quite a handful, and I'll try and attempt to respond to what City has raised in terms of the convenience or coping mechanism. I'll start with the family, and as you say, I think one of the things we've done as a country, and we always raise it factually, is that we have tried to overly prescribe a solution for everything, and you can't, because a lot of problems, there's no law, there's no policy that will fix it. And so in the instance of family issues, we've gone a step further to say the law is not sufficient. Can we conduct awareness? We've done a lot of civic education, alternative dispute resolution such as mediation, and using opinion leaders within the community to try and resolve a lot of the cases that ideally don't need to go to court, because you go to court, the litigation system is acrimonious. You'll end up having a winner and a loser, so that does not preserve the family. So we have been able to give solutions, and the judiciary is aware that really, especially in the family unit, let's preserve the court system or the laws for matters that must go to court. Matters that are complex, such as possibly property disputes, criminal cases for sure have to go through the justice system. But for other issues where we just have a disagreement, or we are agreeing that we are not as good for the children as living under one roof, as possibly co-parenting, there are solutions. And Kenyans, by the way, are really embracing the fact that you can co-parent, you can raise children together. It's not enmity. So there is hope in that. Towards the system, and that's the larger question that Wanjiru has raised, from our perspective as election players, we have a very good legislative framework. It was well thought out. Remember, we spoke about the cyclic nature. The problem is now when you have the vested interests who do not want to comply with the issue of timelines. And I'll single out an example. We are operating currently without commissioners at the IEBC. Every Kenyan knows that. Next week, it will be 1 year after the elections. We still don't have commissioners in the office. Have we raised that? We have. Do people know that we need to fast track? They do. So we'll end up again, history will repeat itself. We'll end up very late in the day having office bearers, yet reports after report have given the benefit of having commissioners in office at a good time. So is it a question of the system not being able, or the legal provisions not being sufficient? They are. It's a vested interest. It's the fact that now we want to play have interest and play games with what we know needs to happen. As a country, we are not even speaking about the issue of delimitation of boundaries. We are time barred. We are supposed to have done it. And that requires a very sober legislative process, whether it's at Parliament, whether it's at National Assembly or Senate. The politicians or the political class and the legislators especially have to embrace their mandate, which is to give life to the law, devoid of your political interest. You took an oath of office to safeguard the Constitution. That's not an easy oath. I've personally undertaken that oath in my capacity as an advocate of the High Court. It's a very weighty oath. That means you must do the right thing. You must be able to put your heart of a political player aside and ask yourselves collectively, what are we expected to do within the law as lawmakers? So that's where we are failing. And we have to push and keep pushing. And by the way, doing the right thing often has pushbacks. So we must be able to continuously keep the momentum and be able to do what is required, whether it's registration of voters in good time, whether it's investing everything. Everyone is now quiet on matters election until the last minute, and we start running helter-skelter. And we are doing the same thing over and over. So why should we expect different results?
But are we really quiet on matters of election?
I don't think we are putting sufficient pressure.
We is who here?
The Kenyans.
The voter.
You see?
The voter. And I'll quantify.
Please quantify.
I'll quantify. I included. We have given too much power to the political leader. They are there by virtue of our vote. So we must be able to recall our members of parliament, for example, and ask them, what are you doing towards this milestone? It's something we must undertake as a country. And so we must empower the individual citizen to be able to ask that question.
How is the individual powered? And I think that's the thing. The how-tos are said, prescribed. But then how? How do we empower a citizen to say, you know what, you who is living, we don't have to talk about the proverbial person who's the mama mboga, as we always say. The person who is living in their home with their children, saying, empower this individual to be able to ask questions of their most immediate leader, of the person whose vote then was given. How does this individual, because essentially what we're talking about, go to your ward office, have a conversation about this thing which you said you would do, what you ought to have done, which you have not done. We're asking for answers. Is that what we're talking about?
That's what we're talking about. And I speak again from a perspective where I know Kenyans have done very well to collectively organize at grassroots level. Leave the petitions in those offices. Say, look, we elected you as a ward representative. We don't see you. You have to answer certain questions. And the Constitution gives us very good mechanisms to be able to even recall members of parliament. Why are we not doing it? It's because, again, as I say, we have glorified leaders who are there by virtue of our vote.
So we've seen
how have we creatively created that ecosystem of glorification? One, it's a corruption. Two, we are not able to ask the questions. Why is it in our country we have to be pushed off the road for someone to pass, yet it's not an emergency vehicle? Those are the conversations, and they're not easy conversations, but we must ask. This Mheshimiwa mentality, at the end of the day, you are there to serve us. Not that we are disrespecting you, but we put you in office, you sought a job, and we need to be able to have you answer us. So we have to empower the citizen to move away from the Mheshimiwa complex, because that's what...
How do we empower the citizen? The citizen is empowered by the Constitution.
Number one, we must be able to limit the power that comes with, whether it's money not earned well, but two, that lack of access. And it's not difficult. These people, when they're looking for votes...
Consider, you see,